Zuri had imagined coming home would feel like a soft landing, warm plates and her father's hand on her shoulder, but the house in Macondo felt smaller than it used to. The table was crowded with cousins and aunts who smiled like judges. When she asked, quietly, about her share of the family land and the freedom to build her life, her father Baraka stood up red with old authority and turned her question into an accusation. He called her ungrateful and told the whole room she wanted to sell the family name. Laughter rolled through the house, low and sharp, like rocks hitting a tin roof. Someone threw a towel at her. An uncle said she must learn her place. Baraka told her to leave and, in front of everyone, pushed her out of the door as if she were trash. The cold night hit her face like truth. Her cheeks burned with more than the chill. She walked without looking back, listening to the laughter fade into the distance and feeling each step harden into a decision. In the dark she counted the small things she had been told she could never have: her own money, her own voice, respect. Those things started to stack up like bricks in her mind. Her hands went to her pockets and found only a crumpled receipt from a long-ago trade, but in that thin paper she felt a spark. She did not cry. She did not run. She started to plan. When Zuri left Macondo she did not take a single suitcase of pride. She learned to make herself small in Kidala, to answer with shy smiles and to call herself the poor niece who could barely afford rent. Nobody in the village knew that her quiet days hid a machine of work. She woke before dawn to answer messages from buyers in far places. She learned the names of ports and shipping lanes the way other people learn prayers. Zuri rented a tiny office above a market stall and filled it with second-hand desks and a battered laptop that she treated like a secret weapon. She walked to meetings in plain shoes so no one would guess she could pay for better. But those meetings were where she built everything. In cafes and borrowed conference rooms she met engineers and freight agents. She listened more than she spoke and then used what she heard to make offers that were small enough to win but smart enough to grow. She found a partner in a quiet accountant who kept his mouth shut and a lawyer who drew papers that looked ordinary. Zuri wrote proposals late into the night and hunted customers in cities 3 time zones away. She learned to read contracts like maps and to fold risk into something she could carry. When deals needed secrecy she set up companies with blank names and trusted managers. When money needed a safe home she opened a trust under the name Z. Amadi, a neutral mask that fit no one at the village table. She funneled earnings through honest invoices and cautious transfers so that the cash never smelled loud. People in Kidala saw a woman who struggled, because struggle makes people invisible. That invisibility became her shield. Years passed and the tiny orders became regular shipments. Her tech parts, small and vital, left Kidala and turned up in factories that built things people used every day. Profits folded back into more inventory, then into property, then into investments that looked like slow seeds. Zuri learned to be patient with money the way a farmer is patient with rain. She kept receipts and messages and voice notes labeled only with numbers and dates. She backed up everything twice. When a cousin joked about her thrift, she smiled and said she had nothing. When a neighbor whispered about her late-night meetings, she said she was just tired. All the while the trust grew, quiet and legal, a clean line of ownership named Z. Amadi. It was not built from theft or lies but from careful work and cold math. The balance sheet at the end of one decade read like a secret: millions in movements, careful accounts, an appendix of contracts that traced customers from Kidala to ports in other continents. She kept the figure to herself. She kept the trust in the shadows until the moment it would speak for her. Zuri did not shout or storm. She walked into Nyembe with a calm that felt loud because it was so strange for her family to see. She hired a corporate lawyer whose suit looked like it belonged to a city that never sleeps, and a forensic accountant who smelled of coffee and late nights. They sat at a small table and she told them the story in pieces, handing over the receipts and the invoices she had kept for years. She showed the voice notes, the shipping manifests, the messages that tied payments from family accounts to purchases Baraka had made for himself. The lawyer and the accountant spoke quietly but fast. They mapped the money like a trail of breadcrumbs. Overnight they worked, tracing transfers, matching signatures, finding the corporate names that hid behind managers and P.O. boxes. Zuri watched as they built a legal net that could catch what had been slipping away for years. The lawyer asked for exact account numbers. The accountant printed statements and circled entries that did not match any real business purpose. They wrote affidavits and swore to facts that could be proved in court. Then, in a small filing room, the lawyer prepared emergency papers. He filed for a freeze on any accounts that held family money, a protective lien on properties registered in Baraka's name, and an injunction to stop anyone from moving or spending funds until a judge could hear the case. Zuri signed where she needed to sign with steady hands. She felt nothing and everything at once. The filings were technical and final. They asked the court to act fast. They asked for an ex parte order so the freeze could happen without giving Baraka a chance to hide cash overnight. The lawyer explained the odds and the risks and Zuri nodded. She had built her case like a quiet wall, now she wanted the court to close the gate. Before dawn the papers were stamped and the bank was notified. The accountant sent legal notices to corporate managers who had been paid from the family accounts. The lien documents were recorded against titles and deeds so properties could not be sold. The injunction was lodged with the courthouse and served that morning. Zuri went to bed in a cheap hotel room in Nyembe while the city moved. She set her phone to wake by the sound of the judge's clerk. In the early hours, alerts started pinging, accounts frozen, withdrawals blocked, transfers reversed. Her phone lit up with terse confirmations and the quiet language of law. She did not celebrate. She felt the weight of the next day, the Thanksgiving table, and the faces that would look up when their cards declined and their pockets were suddenly empty. The plan was in place. The stage was set. All that remained was the walk back to Macondo and the moment when private proof would become public truth. The sun had barely climbed when phones began to buzz around the compound, a sharp, small sound that broke the slow rhythm of a holiday morning. At first people thought it was a wrong number or a petty scam. Then Baraka's son tried to pay for bread at the market and the card was declined. A cousin laughed at first, then his laugh fell away when his own phone lit with a bank alert. Aunties gathered by the gate, palms flat over their chests, reading messages that said accounts were frozen and transfers blocked. Someone shouted for Baraka. He came out in his slippers and stared at the screen like a man who had lost the map to his life. A police officer arrived with a stack of papers and a quiet voice that made everyone fall still. The officer handed a subpoena to the house manager and said it was linked to an order from the city courthouse. People pushed and craned to read. Names of companies and account numbers scrolled like cold facts on the page. The Thanksgiving table sat ready under the mango tree, plates piled with food no one touched. Uncles who had spent freely in recent months walked the yard in circles, calling managers and clutching receipts that now looked like jokes. Baraka tried to call his bank. The line went to an automated voice about an ex parte injunction and legal review. A young cousin ran inside, pale, saying the village accountant could not access any of the family vaults. Rumors spread faster than the jollof would cook. Someone said Zuri had left years ago with nothing. Someone else whispered that she must be behind this. In the middle of the confusion a small, deliberate chime sounded on every phone. It was a message from Zuri. She wrote only a few words. "Please come to the hall for a family meeting," she typed. No explanation. No anger in text. Just a time and a place. The message landed like a match in tinder. People looked up at each other. Faces that had been shouting paused. Mothers folded their arms and tried to steady children who watched the grown-ups like a play. Baraka's jaw hardened. He smoothed the front of his shirt as if to hide the trembling in his hands. The house, which had felt like a stage for his commands, seemed suddenly small and exposed. Neighbors peered over fences. A few people filmed with their phones, more out of habit than malice, because the strange feel of the morning invited capture. In the kitchen, a plate slipped from an aunt's hand and hit the ground with a hollow sound. The sound seemed louder than the alarms. Outside, the road to Macondo lay pale and quiet under the sun already climbing. Inside the compound, the family gathered toward the hall like a flock called by a voice they did not expect to obey. No one knew what to expect. No one knew if this would be apologies, shouting, arrests, or laughter. But they all moved, because when money stops, old rules change, and the truth that had been only a rumor would have to stand in the open and be named. Jabari did not expect to find much when he started looking through old files and messages. He had been angry, hurt, and exhausted, but curiosity drove him. At first, he just wanted to understand how far things had gone. As he flipped through emails, scanned invoices, and checked bank statements, small surprises turned into sharp shocks. There were loans Asha had never mentioned, loans he realized he had been quietly covering for her without knowing it. Then he found transactions moving money out of the clinic account into something called Kimbali Partners, a venture he had never heard of, a project that seemed to benefit someone else, someone powerful who no one talked about. Each line made his chest tighten. He compared dates with the payments he had been making, the tuition he covered, the clinic bills he wired. It was like seeing a hidden map of their life, one drawn in secrecy. His anger shifted from humiliation to disbelief. How had he missed this? He began asking questions, quietly, testing answers. The more he dug, the more the picture changed. The money he thought had been flowing just to keep her afloat had been redirected in ways he could not have imagined. There were letters and agreements he had never seen, some signed with a patron whose influence stretched across town. Suddenly, the narrative everyone had been following, Asha as the wronged one, him as the furious ex, felt incomplete. Sympathy became complicated. He remembered the party in Zawadi Heights, the public humiliation, and now he saw the ledgers behind it, showing choices she had made and secrets she had kept. It was no longer a simple story of heartbreak and revenge. This revelation forced him to reconsider every interaction, every kind word, every demand for money he had fulfilled. Was he a victim, or had he been unknowingly funding someone else's plan? Was she simply ambitious, or was she manipulating everyone around her? The answers were not clear, and that uncertainty made every decision heavier. He realized the moral stakes were higher than just money or pride. This was about truth, accountability, and power. The city had already picked sides, but now the lines blurred. Every friend who had judged too quickly, every neighbor who whispered, every social media post, all of it seemed partial, incomplete, misleading. Jabari knew what came next would not just be another argument. It would be a showdown that tested morality, trust, and the very nature of their past together. He had the evidence now, the hidden ledgers that reframed everything. What he chose to do with them would decide not only their futures but also how the city would remember the scandal that had already gone viral. The quiet work of uncovering truth had set the stage for a storm nobody could ignore. The cousin's live video was the thin cord that pulled the house into the open. At first it was a shaky phone shot of the hall, Zuri at the table, papers spread like evidence. The cousin laughed nervously into the camera and then looked up as the room tightened. Within minutes the clip had jumped from phone to phone, then to social apps, then to groups and feeds where people who had never heard of Macondo were suddenly watching a family argue about money. Notifications multiplied. Strangers wrote quick judgments. Some cheered Zuri. Others called her names. A few clips stitched the scene into memes overnight. By noon a local news van arrived, lights on the roof, and a reporter spoke into a microphone with the compound in the background. The gate filled with curious neighbors and camera crews. People outside the village crowded to see what had become the story of the weekend. Inside, Baraka moved like a man in a game he had not planned to play. He tried to speak softly to relatives, to make deals and promises he thought could stop the cameras. He asked managers to start transfers. He called old friends in the city and begged for help that could undo the court orders. Those calls went to voicemail. He paced the yard, touch and release like someone looking for the past he could still hold. Zuri's lawyer stayed calm. He had expected public heat and he used it. He read through the evidence again in front of the cameras with a clear voice so people could hear the numbers and the dates. He showed signed invoices and receipts and the trust documents that put ownership in Z. Ahmadi. He explained, in simple lines, that the freeze was legal and temporary. He said the court had acted on sworn facts and that the injunction would remain until a judge ordered otherwise. He framed the move not as punishment but as protection. He said the law allows a person to secure assets when there are reasonable signs of misuse. That sentence landed like a small hammer. Reporters asked if criminal charges were coming. The lawyer said they would file what was necessary, then pointed to the recordings and the bank entries that suggested Baraka had used family funds for his own debts. Bloggers dug into the story and found old social posts showing the family living beyond obvious means. Some voices demanded instant justice. Others warned of public shaming and the harm that comes with a viral clip. In the middle of it all, Baraka tried bargaining in public and private. He offered partial repayment, promises of apology, and a short statement for the cameras. Zuri listened. She had planned for this too. Her terms were clear and simple: public apology, full accounting, and steps to return what he had taken. No private hush money. No quiet deals. The feeds kept rolling. The town watched. The story was no longer just about money. It was about trust, power, and what happens when a quiet life becomes a public mirror. When the dust of the courtroom and the glare of cameras finally eased, the hard edges of the story bent toward things that looked like choices. Baraka woke to a new quiet, not the proud hush of a man in charge, but the hollow silence of someone whose reputation had cracked in public. The first weeks were punishment, subpoenas, careful audits, and a slow, painful accounting of transfers that had once been hidden behind excuses and false invoices. He met lawyers who asked him to explain things he had never explained to his children, and sitting in sterile rooms he began to hear his own life in facts and figures. Humiliation came first, remorse followed like rain after a long dry spell. Some relatives could not bear the change and doubled down, angry that the family's secrets were now a world story. They accused Zuri of betrayal and of turning private pain into public spectacle. Others looked at the paper trail and the recordings and felt their old loyalties loosen. A few walked across the same yard they had always known and sat with Zuri to ask how to make things right. Zuri did not look for revenge. She wanted something steadier: repair. Her terms were firm and clear: she would unfreeze accounts and negotiate settlements only if Baraka publicly apologized, agreed to a plan of financial ethics counseling, and returned goods and funds that audits showed were taken for personal use. She wanted public truth, not hush money. She wanted the village to learn how money can be handled honestly. The negotiations were messy and human. Baraka wrote a statement at first that read like a man drafting a script, then he rewrote it until the words stopped sounding like defense and started sounding like truth. He turned up at community meetings red-faced and honest, and he sat for sessions with a counselor who taught him to name temptation and to put systems in place so managers could not move money without oversight. Some family members refused to accept the apology and left the house in bitterness. Others came back slowly, testing the waters of trust with small reconciliations, shared meals, joint efforts to fix a roof, the return of cherished items that had been taken or sold. The law did its work, but so did simple acts: Baraka handing over keys, signing documents, helping a cousin open a bank account with transparent books. The village watched these gestures like weather, waiting to see if they would hold. Zuri supervised settlements with a steady hand but a soft heart, accepting plans that meant real restitution and community repair. In time the anger cooled into something wiser. The story that began with money ended with a harder lesson about power and responsibility, and with a small, growing hope that people could choose repair over ruin. Months later the village shook awake to a different kind of mourning: flags, folding chairs, and a steady line of people who came not for gossip but for hope. Zuri stood beside a ribbon that carried her mother's name, the woman who taught her how to keep her head when the wind turned. The fund was small at first by big city standards, but it was honest money put into a community bank account with open books and a board that included teachers and traders from Macondo. Children from the school held flowers. Women who had argued the loudest months earlier sat quietly in the crowd. Baraka came too, his shirt untucked, eyes rimmed with tiredness, and when he stepped forward to cut the ribbon he did it with hands that trembled. He did not make a speech full of old pride, instead he said simple words, "Sorry, I was wrong," and the apology landed like a stone into still water, making rings that reached the people who had watched him for a lifetime. Someone in the crowd filmed the moment. The clip moved faster than the village can move, and by evening it had gone to phones in other towns. The image that stuck was odd and very human, Baraka dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief while Zuri smiled without joy and without triumph. She had kept the $58 million legally hers, not as spite but as proof that she could hold power without breaking people. The fund began to pay for school books, a small health clinic, and a microloan program that helped women start stalls with clear ledgers and real receipts. People came to learn how to run money openly. Zuri stayed long enough to watch the first project start and then walked away down the road at sunrise, the village behind her waking into its new rules. The ending was not a victory lap but a lesson: respect, fairness, and clear accounting last longer than loud pride. The last shot, Baraka at the ribbon, hand on the ribbon, face wet with relief, went viral because it showed a man and a daughter learning to be two different people in the same village.